With summer over, most families are getting back to the grind of the school year, which means you might not be able to see loved ones as often as usual.
That's right. Schedules tend to change. This includes the grandparents. But how do you set up healthy boundaries to avoid the communication breakdowns and maybe resentment that otherwise wouldn't be there? Joining us with more tips this morning, child care advocate Florence and Romano. Florence, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. So let's start with that. Successfully setting boundaries with our own parents. What should we be considering here?
Sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
they can set these boundaries. And it scares people when you say that too, because automatically you think, oh, I'm doing something wrong, and you're feeling rejected. And the truth is, it's a hard situation when you have grandparents taking care of your children, because you can't necessarily treat them the same way you would if it was a stranger that was coming into your home and they were a paid babysitter of some kind. And so you get into kind of these little tiffs sometimes with the in-laws or your parents, whomever it is, because there's a difference in perhaps how you're raising your children and how they maybe raised you. And I understand how parents feel like, I have so much experience. Those, grandparents feel like, I know what to do. And if they see you doing something that's different than what they would do, they start to feel like, oh, I have to put my opinion in because that's my job as the grandparent. I have to somehow manage the situation. But it's difficult because you want to allow the grandparents to establish a relationship with the grandchildren while also honoring the values of the home that you're creating.
That's perfectly stated. And communicating boundaries to your folks, how do you even approach the topic? How do you get started on that?
Well, you don't ever want to attack. I always say what you mean, but don't say it mean. And an example of this, a friend of mine, she came home to discover that the grandmother had pierced her daughter's ears without asking. And it was a big blow up. The grandma was like, I did it when I was when you were this age, what does it matter? And her daughter was like, you have to ask me before you put a hole in my daughter's ears. And, it kind of was a problem in the relationship a bit, because there was trust that was lost there, and it took a bit to rebuild it. They finally calmed down from that kind of passionate peak, but discussed the fact that there have to be rules and that this isn't your child. You do have to ask for permission. And it did end up creating boundaries in the relationship that are being honored to this day. But unfortunately, it took that to have that conversation. But it doesn't always have to be that dramatic. It could just be when you do start having the grandparents in the home that you are clear about what the boundaries are. What's the rule about sweets? What's the rule about screen time? What about nap time? You do want to make sure that they are following those rules, because it helps you as the parent. And let's remember, the whole reason you have help is so you, the parent, has peace of mind, not to make you crazier. So make sure you're having those conversations right from the jump is going to set you up for success.
And I guess, though, you can have all the conversations you want, but sometimes you just don't know until that moment, right? You could have talked about hey, let's talk about sweets, nap time, and then it was the ear piercing out of nowhere, right? So It's
true. Sometimes you're just going to have to deal with it in the moment, but the old adage that, just maybe, count to 5 before you say something, or walk away for a second and collect your thoughts before you just start spewing. We're not perfect people. We're all going to make mistakes, but also from the other side of things, we have to respect that grandparents also have their own set of rules and their own boundaries. They're stepping in to help you, and they also are getting older, and maybe they have medical needs, or maybe you're not being as appreciative as they deserve, perhaps. And writing them a thank you note, or making sure every week that you're making sure they feel that they are a part of the family and that they're valued and you appreciate the time they're giving. So a little kindness goes a long way on both sides. But in the moment, when you are dealing with something, practice that patience, practice that understanding. Sometimes it can be very difficult to do with family members.
Oh, it's so true. So Florence, is anything off limits when you're talking to your parents or your in-laws with what you want to have happen in your home with your kids?
I don't think there's anything off limits. I think the only thing that you have to be mindful of is your delivery. And I think that's all of us in life. You know, sometimes our delivery can just be awful, but our intention is really lovely. So just making sure that when you are having a conversation, it doesn't sound overly critical. It doesn't shame them, embarrass them necessarily. There's a way to say something to get your point across without necessarily making them feel rejected. And, you know, again, you want them to cultivate a great relationship. I grew up in an old-fashioned Italian home. My mom's parents lived with us. It was the best time of my life. I loved my grandparents more than anything. And you are teaching your children, too, really great lessons when they're exposed to their grandparents like that. There's a lot of respect that you learn being around older people, the stories you hear, and compassion and empathy. So, again, it could be a really beautiful situation. You just have to make sure that you come to the table prepared and also ready to deal with things that come up that maybe you couldn't necessarily prepare for either.
So for families who want to get more, to read more, maybe they're having trouble approaching this conversation, where should they go for more information?
You can visit me on Instagram, florenceann.romano. I answer every DM. I think of me as your virtual village. I'm happy to talk it through, or go to my website. I have a ton of blogs, especially about this, florenceann.romano.
All right. It's great that the resource is out there.
Florence, your delivery is beautiful. If you could just call my mother after the show and just break it to her lightly. I'm kidding. Thank you for the help. It can be delicate, the dance you have with your folks when you yourself are an adult, right? All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.